everybody, and welcome to another Illustrator Modeler. In this video, I'm going to refurbish a model. So as you can imagine, I have quite a few models in my collection. This one in particular dates back, over 10 years ago. And I'm sure you probably do this from time to time. You look at some of your older models and you can see how different they look compared to the models that you make today. And that's certainly the case with this one. There are a lot more things that I do these days with model kits that I just didn't do back then. So I just thought it would make an interesting project to see what we could do to refurbish a model kit. You know, certainly we could toss this one away and buy another one on eBay. I have no doubt you can find these kits still on eBay. But I don't know. I think that there's definitely a possibility here to just tear this down and start it as if it's a brand new project and go from there. So let's spend a minute just to take a look at the model as it is right now. First of all, there are a couple pieces missing, which I've already placed into a small plastic bag. I'm going to go ahead and take some photos so that we can have some before and after shots, but also as a guide to remember how to put some of the parts back on since I don't have any instructions. As I look at the model, you can see that the seams are definitely pretty obvious there. I did not take any time to address any seams. Also, some of the pieces were not cut properly. You can see there's some flashing there. And the decals have definitely yellowed, so we're going to have to replace those. And this actually was my first attempt at really using pastels to weather the model. I applied some light weathering. You can see some windswept patterns here. And you can see that I used pastels to darken up some of the panels along the nacelles. And we have the sensor array that is removable. You can see I painted some of the components here. I think it would look better with a little bit of weathering and a wash there along with some dry brushing. So there are three basic objectives here. One is to repaint the model. 2 is replace these old decals, and 3, add some lighting. But before we do any of that, we're going to have to take apart the model. So let's go ahead and get started. Now this is one tool that I got off of Amazon. It's made for snap-tight models. You basically insert this tip here into the pieces and you can pry them apart. So hopefully this will help with taking apart the model. Let's go ahead and give it a shot. That was a different experience, pulling everything apart. Usually you're used to putting models together. So I'm happy that all the pieces came off and they are all in one piece, so nothing broke. And so the next step now is to go ahead and take these decals off. Alright, well my original intention was to just repaint over the base color that you see here and you know, just remove the decals and sand a few places here and there, which I already started doing that. But the more I converse with people online, particularly this Facebook page that's devoted to redoing Aurora kits, a lot of those are old figure kits, most of them were suggesting to just remove the paint. I didn't think it was quite necessary, but I thought it would be a good exercise here anyway, just to show you how this technique works. So there's two ways you can go about it. You can use oven cleaner, or you can use this Purple Power stuff. This is a degreaser that you can find at Walmart. It was only $4 for this big bottle. So essentially what we're going to do is take all our pieces and submerge them in this stuff and let them sit overnight, and apparently the paint should just come right off. Any excess that's there can be taken off with a toothbrush. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so the parts here have been soaking for about 4 hours or so. I thought I would just come out and see how it's doing, and you can see how the paint is coming off the model. Just taking a toothbrush here, and it doesn't take much with the toothbrush just to scrub it, and you can see the paint just comes right off. So we're going to continue to let this soak overnight, and we'll check it here in the morning, but it looks like it's working out just fine. Alright, it's time to get to scrubbing the model parts there. So I've got rubber gloves here as well as an eye shield, and let's just go ahead and see how this looks here. So it appears that the paint is definitely coming off, but the primer is staying. And that's going to be okay. as you saw there, it was very easy to remove the paint after having soaked these parts in that purple solution overnight. I'm very pleased with the outcome here. As you can tell, the pieces do retain this light gray color because the original primer did stay on. The model was molded in a white plastic. But the primer I used back then was Duplicolor's gray filler primer. They still make it today. And the reason I chose that primer is because it would never chip off the model. I never had any problems with it coming off. But I'm okay with the primer staying on here. I don't have any problems with that. The other thing I'm very pleased with is the way that these clear parts turned out. They came through the process undamaged. You can see they're nice and clear. And one thing I want to mention about the front windows here is that, as you can tell, I removed all the paint here, but I didn't do much with the rear windows, and that's because I intend to repaint those black. But with the front windows, I actually want to try to duplicate the look of the original miniature. If you look at pictures of the original studio model, you'll see two seated figures here in the cockpit with the light shining at them so you can see them through the windows. And that's what I intend to do here, is to find some 172 figures we can use for that while painting the windows with Tamiya's clear smoke color. So, speaking of lighting, let's go ahead and move on to that. I'm going to review my plans with you now in detail. So this schematic shows all the lights I'll be installing. When I started this project, I did not anticipate it would be this many, but since I'm going to do this, I might as well just go all the way. First, let me talk about these blinking lights. And so recently I pulled up an episode on DVD just to kind of see some footage of the miniature and see where I would need to install lights. And it turns out there are these blinking lights. There's 3 that you'll see on the top of the ship or from the top view. You've got 1 on each end of the nacelle. You got 1 here and 1 underneath the cockpit. And those blink all in unison, kind of a strobe effect. And I had a system of lights exclusively designed by ModelTrainSoftware.com, and I got in contact with them and told them what I was looking for. I had them look at some footage of the ship, and they designed a system for me. So I'll show you how that works in just a second. From the rear of the ship, you'll see the impulse engines glowing red, and we've got the blue glow of the nacelles. Got a dim interior cockpit light to light those figures I mentioned earlier. And this extended sensor also has lights. I did not realize that until I watched that episode. And then we've got the orange glow here. We've got some running lights, 1 green and 1 red. And of course we have the red glow of the Bassard collectors. So here we have 4 chip-size SMDs. They are cool white in color. They're hooked up to the circuit board, and this was designed by Dave at Model Train Software. So let me turn it on. And you can see the effect is a quick flash, not quite as bright as a strobe, and they all blink in unison. So the first step in lighting here, I'm going to get started with this section, and we need to cut out these pieces here. As you can see, I've already done it here. And the method I use for this is to take a pin vise and drill holes along the perimeter, and then use a sharp X-Acto knife to cut out the piece, followed by sanding it smooth. So here we have our finished pieces now, and the reason for going through all this trouble again is simply just because I'm going to be illuminating this from the back. The piece was originally glued onto the model, so there was a lot of built-up glue and plastic back here, and it would have been difficult to try to illuminate through that. So I figure we can cut this out, replace it with some thinner styrene, and that'll be easier to light up. However, the pieces that were cut out of there have this particular texturing, and I was trying to think of a way to texture the styrene that we'll be putting back in place here. And so I was speaking to modeler Joey Shipman, and he had mentioned, and he's built a number of these, actually he's built a few of these runabouts, that he just put some mesh there from like a screen door. And so I was going to proceed with that, but then I was trying to think of maybe a different way to do it, and came up with this here. So this is some fishnet from an old fish tank fishnet, and you can see it has somewhat of a similar pattern as the texture that we're trying to go for here. So this is a lot thinner, and I figure it might be easier to attach to our model. So what I'm going to do is spray some adhesive on here, place this onto the styrene, and hopefully when that's all dried we'll have a textured piece of styrene that looks somewhat similar to this. So here I have a piece of white styrene with the material stuck onto it. The adhesive I used for this was this tacky glue. I just watered it down a little bit because this stuff's pretty thick, and that allowed me to brush it onto this stuff here. I just laid the material onto the plastic, brushed the adhesive on there, and allowed it to dry overnight, and it's looking pretty good. So if we put our piece up here, you can see it's giving us the texture that we're looking for. It's a little larger pattern than what originally came with it, but I think it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and take some white primer and cut out the pieces, and I'll show you what it looks like here in a second. So you know what, before moving on with the white piece, I decided to go ahead and try this with a clear piece of styrene. And just showing you the technique here, I'm brushing on this watered down tacky glue. And then I can speed up the drying process by using a hairdryer. Alright, so here we have our pieces. You can see I started out with that white piece I showed you just a second ago, but I also decided to go ahead, since I had some extra netting, to apply it to a clear piece of styrene. The reason I didn't start out with this is because I wasn't sure how it would look after the glue dried, but since I had some extra netting, I figured I'd give it a shot. And you know, it actually is looking pretty good, so I may end up using this one instead. If I sand the backside, it will obscure things even further, so that'll help with light diffusion as well. Alright guys, I'm going to go ahead and end this video here. As I do so, I'll show you some more shots as I continue to prep this section for lighting. You can see I'm cutting the front and back sections here so that we can accommodate lighting for the impulse engines and the front part that glows orange. In part 2, I'm going to set this section aside for a little bit as I complete the nacelles. So we'll start with that, move back to this, and finally wrap up with installing the lights for the main part of the ship. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at interstellarmodeler@gmail.com. As always, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in part 2. Take care.